Great. Hello.
There we go. So we're going to record the last half hour because, like an idiot, I forgot to record the entire thing. But you're going to benefit from a few questions that have come in after the webinar. And we'll just pick these off one by one, and hopefully there are some answers.
So there was a question earlier on, just to give everyone else a chance to have a look, on why there are no 4-star case studies in main panel B in our sample. This is just a sampling issue, so we're not saying that it was more difficult to achieve 4-star in main panel B. That was the question. Was there anything that prevented main panel B case studies from getting 4-star? The answer in our case is it's just a sampling issue, and because we could only include case studies where 100% of the submission had achieved 4-star, we didn't get enough of those. But that doesn't mean anything for anything else. Maybe not the best question to start the recording with, but if you finish well, that's just something I wanted to clarify here.
Great. So I've got a follow-up question from Holly. Yeah, Alicia, do you want to go first?
No, I was just saying somebody's asked if we could provide a link to the podcast. So I was just going to say I'm going to find the link and provide that for everyone in a second.
Fast Track Impact /ref resources, or go to my resources page. It's at the top of that page. I put the link at the beginning. I'll put it again right at the very end. In fact, I think I've got it open in front of me. There we go. I'll just put it right now. So just following up, we have a question about this idea that I'm going to privilege my higher scoring impacts and potentially remove some of the lower scoring ones if I think that they might put my overall score at risk. And the question here from Holly is, well, yeah, I've got I think a fairly impressive policy impact, but actually there was a precursor impact where we raised public awareness. I think that was what it was. There was something else as well, public awareness. There was public engagement, yeah. And so you can evidence public awareness claims to 4-star, and there are lots of good examples of this with public engagement case studies. Quite often you need a problem statement to be able to do that. Why was it such an issue that people were not aware of this? Why was that problematic before? So people were not aware of the importance of washing hands before coronavirus, and they are now. And the fact that we're now aware of that is important because, you know what, that lack of awareness might cost lives, that kind of thing. So where necessary, you've got a problem statement to contextualize, justify that, and then you've got evidence for the significance and the reach. And with public awareness type claims, reach is often implicit. It's rarely actually proven in any way. And yeah, great, we get to 4-star, but if actually this was in reality a pathway, so we need to make people aware of this, and as a result of that, there was enough pressure that now eventually we got the policy. Well, you know, actually this is now lost in the midst of time. I can't really prove it. It's a fairly low grade claim. I'm getting this evaluated by various people. It's coming back as 1-star. For me, I would then just include that as pathway or potentially remove it. In my own impact case study, it's primarily a policy impact case study. There's a whole load of public engagement, social media engagement that was an important pathway. And at no point do I even mention the social media because, you know what, the point is we got the policy and it works. And who now really cares, by contrast to my hopefully 4-star claim, is that we raise some awareness on the pathway.
Yeah. There's been a question about geographical reach. Fairly at the beginning, I think the original question was, does it have to be international, or can UK impact also be 4-star? Yes, certainly, I would say. I mean, in 2014, it was certainly the case that you could get 4-star with non-international reach. And in fact, in reviews that I did over the last couple of weeks, I found case studies where I actually said, take out or suggested considering taking out the international bit, because it was something like Mark just discussed, one of the less strong impact claims. and say that just focus on the really, really strong UK-based impact, and the fact that you presented this at a conference in Canada really doesn't add much to the change that you've affected in the UK. So you've rephrased the question. The new guidance stresses that it's not about geography, but how well you reach into a constituency. Yes. And I think that's where context comes in. So you would have to say these are the number of people who could potentially be affected. So if this is a main panel A case study or a UA1 case study, this is the number of people who are affected by this particular condition. And we are reaching 60% of those people. Yes, that's great. And it matters less in that case at what geographical scale that is, if all of these are in the UK or if you've exported that technology to the US or Malaysia, wherever, is then not the deciding factor, I would hope.
Following up from that example, though,
and
actually, if the answer is I've only got 10%, I felt, sorry, I'll come to you in a moment, Alicia. If I've only got 10%, let's have a look at who those 10% are. And if actually that happens to be a hard to reach or a vulnerable group, then what is the percentage of that hard to reach and vulnerable subgroup that we've reached? And can you use some evidence to explain why? Well, yeah, the numbers might look small, but actually this is important, hard to reach, diverse, or whatever other kind of group. Sorry, Alicia.
I was just going to say, I think the question also asks, what is it in terms of guidance? And actually within the REF guidance, it clearly does say impacts will be assessed in terms of their reach and significance, regardless of geographic location in which they occurred, whether locally, regionally, nationally, or internationally. So there are a couple of points: reach of impacts, that is the extent or diversity of the communities affected. So I just thought I'd quote from the actual guidance, because the question did ask that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's something that came out of our analysis, actually. If I can just add to that. So this is not explicit in the paper, actually. And I'm going to put a caveat around this because of the stats around this. And correct me if I'm wrong, Bella, here, but I'm pretty sure if you keep the significance threshold at 0.05 rather than 0.01, as we did in the paper, that England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales all come out as associated with the high scoring corpus. Is that correct? Can you remind me? It's a while ago since I looked at the data.
I don't want to say yes or no because I don't want to confirm this right now.
Okay. A slightly hazy memory on this one. I'm pretty sure that I think England only comes out when you reduce it to 0.1, whether it's all of them, but there's certainly some of them. And it's the high scoring, not the low scoring. The point is that the guidance did say this, and whether that's strong or weak evidence, it's a suggestion that the panels did apply that guidance. An impact in England equals Scotland equals the US equals Sierra Leone. That shouldn't matter. But the evidence does suggest, contrary to the evidence, it's contrary to the guidance, certainly in main panels A, B, and C, if this was very local, then that may have been a problem. So if you've got a local case study, then you need to really work on contextualizing why that is actually significant and far-reaching.
Yes, certainly for contextualizing, but I would also say a similarly boring thing about sampling here, because of the way that we collected those case studies, we have a disproportionate amount of case studies in main panels C on social work, social policy, education, and these often work with local authorities. So the word local and local authorities sometimes also comes from simply the fact that they were working with local authorities and schools and these kinds of scales, even if they may have worked with every single local authority. So I would not want to emphasize that too much. So perhaps I'm slightly contradicting Mark here and saying maybe we shouldn't read too much into this.
Yeah, and I think the paper is very clear. Yeah.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave now, everyone. I've got some other things to do. So thank you, everyone, for listening. And thank you, Mark and Bella, for letting me join. And I'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
For the inputs to the paper and the webinar. That's been great.
Thank you. Bye.
Wonderful. So someone's asked, are all inputs, are all impacts of equal importance? And citing some of the stuff here in main panel A, the proportion of health and well-being impact case studies higher in high scoring versus low scoring. We've got various findings like this. I think it's really dangerous to generalize from things like this. I think the one thing that I feel comfortable generalizing across my experience of case study reviews is that capacity building impacts across the board are least competitive. And that's because they are on the margins of eligibility. They are officially, if you look at the ref guidance, eligible, but they are kind of almost not eligible because they're almost prospectively future claiming. So yeah, we've built a wall, but we've got no idea if it protects anyone until the flood comes. And you will always be asked the question, so did this thing work? Yeah, you've got skills. Did you use them? When you use them, did it help people? Just the fact that I now have new skills, or I've got new kit, or we've got new infrastructure, whatever it is, doesn't necessarily mean that that is going to play through in future. So you've always got that critique that can be leveled, well, I don't know if this is going to work in future. And I think that it's very hard to get a capacity building claim standalone above the 3-star mark. But that's based on my experience rather than on our analysis. And I think it's quite dangerous to generalize. If you're in health, therefore we should always be focusing health impacts. You could get 4-star with an economic, with a social impact just as likely. I'm not sure if there's someone off mute or question.
How would you frame an impact that is unintended but more significant than what your original research was designed to do? Would you be upfront about that, or try and link it to your work?
Ooh,
well, I haven't
what do you think,
before, but sorry?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm interested to hear what you're going to say now.
My gut reaction to this question is, it doesn't really matter whether you intended it or not.
Yeah.
However, it needs to be linked to your work somehow. So if someone took your research and ran with it and did something amazing with it and achieved amazing impact, whether or not it boils down to your initiative, I think doesn't matter very much for this context if this happens. Mostly it doesn't happen. Mostly you have to go. Sorry?
Yeah. As long as it boils down to your research, maybe not you that took it anywhere or did anything with it, but as long as it links back to your research, to be completely, someone else who's gone and done something crazy with it that you didn't know about.
Yeah, so if they did it with it, but the question is then, is it really linked to your research? Did they do something that, it's a correlation causation question, right? Mm-hmm. So did they do this and you think, oh, this looks really like the recommendation that we made? Can you link it? If you cannot link it, if there's no way for you to evidence that their actions, impact, whatever, is related to them having read your research, if it's not based on your research in any way, regardless of who did the impact bit, then you can't really claim it. But from what the question sounds like, that does not seem to be an issue. If there's unintended but significant impact that can be linked to your research, then great, I would say.
One of the things that came from the qualitative part of our work that I've seen in at least 2 other studies of REF 2014 case studies is the idea that when you interview the case study authors, they say that the reality was more messy, less linear, more complicated than what they actually wrote in their case study. And so there is a process of simplifying and linearizing the narrative so you can get your head around it and tell a story. And of course, there's then a moral red line that you have to make sure you don't cross in terms of at what point have I now just simplified and told a story which is still based on the facts of what happened, and at what point now am I making things up? And so I would have a think. I think I would have to look at it both ways. Is there a stronger, clearer narrative in terms of, and then this random other thing happens that we weren't expecting, or can you actually create that into a causal chain? Does that work better as long as you are not claiming that it was us, we took it there, and saying something which is factually incorrect?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
So
very much into the maths case studies
the
where you've got these very indirect causal chains. Yeah, theoretical maths leads to an algorithm, leads to a bit of software, leads to whatever else. And with those indirect ones, the key thing is that you've got that first link in the chain that that from our theoretical mathematics, that algorithm would not have been possible. And then if that is the case, and there are examples in the REF 2014 case study from maths, then you can then claim all of the impacts that arise from that software, despite having had nothing to do with the development of that software. And the way you find that out is usually through a citation analysis. Yeah, are there some crazy impacts lurking out there I have no idea about?
yeah.
Yeah. So the answer to that last one from Joe Minette is yes, but you have to be really crystal clear on that first causal link, because if there's any doubt on that first link between your bit of theoretical maths, stroke algorithm, and that bit of software, then the whole thing can be cold from that one critique. So you have to be watertight on that first link in an indirect one. Yeah. So I'm working on a case study for panel D. We're wanting to evidence raised awareness of evidence of international press coverage. Should we try to get estimated audiences? We're currently wary of this. It's so speculative. So I just released a guide on this, actually. I'll try and find the link if anyone else wants. Do you want to start while I get the link to this, Bella?
Yes. So again, my gut reaction to this is it does not. More important than estimating the scale of the audience would be to estimate, did they actually listen, and did it actually arrive with that audience? And that, of course, is much more difficult to measure. So even if you have tons of viewers, is that because their telly was on in the background, or is that because someone actually engaged with it? And of course, that's near impossible to evidence. So not a helpful answer from me, but I got the
So I think
reaction.
the
So
key
Mark, have
thing
you
is, in ref terms, reach without significance is meaningless. It doesn't matter how much reach I've got if I can't prove that even a sample of those people we reached benefited in some way. That reach is worthless in ref terms. That is the key point. So the key challenge is significance. In this guide, you will see 3 methods for doing this, and you can listen to a podcast interview with someone who did the higher maintenance version of this, which was research that got integrated into the TV soap Casualty, 4 episodes of it on maggot therapy. And they did a large N sample of Casualty viewers via a polling company before and after to look for changes in awareness. Are you now aware that there is maggot therapy and what it does? And changes in attitude. Do you think they are as disgusting now as you did before? And as a result, are you more likely to accept maggot therapy on the NHS? I just reviewed a case study with some colleagues where it was a similar kind of thing, but it was with exhibitions. And so we've had all these visitors to these exhibitions, but we need to know not just the numbers, but what was the benefit of this. And for the next iteration of the exhibition, they sent some researchers to do qualitative interviews with them, and they analysed those qualitative interviews and wrote up a report on that. And it could be just a survey that you're doing, that's fine. An online survey at that of a sample of those viewers or visitors. In this case, though, they were trying to get to those kind of deeper changes in attitudes, maybe cultural benefits, a sense of place in history, etc. And actually, yeah, you need to draw those out because they're implicit, and you need a method like a semi-structured interview, or methods from the arts and humanities. And so we've got a paper which you can read in the ref resources section of my website, reviewing evidence gathering methods, including from the arts and humanities. And there's a whole load of arts and humanities methods that are fantastic at getting that implicit benefit explicit and evidenceable to get a sense of really what this means deeply to people.
We have a question about something that we talked about already before we started recording. Why does it matter so much to frame the underpinning research section more concisely to make more space for the narrative and the impact section. Because it doesn't really, because it is an eligibility criterion. In section 2, it is a good idea to stick to that indicative word limit, something between 400 and 550 words maybe, so that you say, what did you do, and especially, even more importantly, what did you find that helped contribute to the impact? What from your research, so maybe start with a problem statement, but then how did your research address that? What was your finding? And then link ahead to the impact. It is not the important bit of the case study. If the research was 4-star or if the research was 2-star, in theory, it really does not matter as long as it was such that it was used by somebody to change something or prevent change intentionally in the world outside of academia. That is what gets you points. Section 4. Section 2 is only to show that your research had good quality and that the research is actually underpinning your impact. But other than that, it's not the important part. Sorry, academics.
Cool. So I've looked at through the questions. I think we've answered everything in the chat. So we've still got 30 people with us. If you would like to just turn on your mic.
I think there was one question.
Yeah. Okay, good. So
I think there was one question
first, then ask yourself if you've got a question. We'll just have an open mic for the final segment. So Bella, one final answer.
Yeah, I can't find it. I think someone asked about, maybe we have answered this now, and someone asked about impact versus research. What if is it okay to publish the research after the impact, and how do you disentangle projects where you have impact through focus groups and that also contributes to your research? But I don't know whether the person who asked the question is still with us, which in a way we should still answer because we're recording. I don't know.
Yeah. And the short answer is that it doesn't. The guidance is clear. Your underpinning research can come out after the impact, and that's because you just can't control all the various factors around publication that will delay your research from coming out. I think that if that looks suspicious, people look at it and they're pulling that out and it looks wrong, then in the same way you would with any paper you're writing or book, you head off those reviewer critiques up front and you write some explanation to explain why that is the case. But in most cases, that's not necessary because it's not a problem. The guidance says that it can come up afterwards. It can be published after the impact.
Yeah.
Good. So open mic. Anyone wants to? We've got some more questions coming as well, but so either open mic or we'll answer them.
Yeah, there's a question that fairly early on, which I've answered in the chat. Are the Flesch reading ease test and co-metric software publicly available? Is it feasible to run our case studies through before submission? Yes, it is. It's tool.co-metrics, I think, .com. Actually, I
think the link's in the paper, though, isn't it, Valerie? I'm pretty sure it's.
It is in the paper, exactly. Yeah. So it's in the paper somewhere, but I can post the link. So yes, great idea. I sometimes do that actually during reviewing. Recently, I had a paragraph in section 1, section 2, and I thought I really had to read this 3 times. And I know I'm not a specialist, but still, so I just stuck it in the tool and said, look, this is the score that it comes out with. It was a ridiculously low score. Could you please rephrase that? So yeah, I'll get you the link.
But the nice thing is that you're benchmarking that against what we've got for 4-star here. And so you're not now telling people that you've got to get the score up to a level to be read in a broadsheet newspaper, because that would potentially be doubling down. Co-creation, practice-based research, action research. This is a category of research which is fairly problematic because it doesn't fit into the nice linear way in which a ref case study template works. Very often we're starting with the impact and now we're researching what we're doing to achieve that impact, and it's kind of the wrong way around. So what I recommend in this situation, if this is problematic, is that you try and artificially divorce the two from each other. And you look at those papers, which the papers themselves will be a mix of research and impact. And you ask yourself, what is the new knowledge? And I'm asking myself with my ref output criteria on what is academically significant and original about this, assuming it's robust, that's the easy one. And I'm pulling out those parts and I'm shining them up as a narrative about here's the research. And then I'm going to the impact parts and I'm asking myself, what is the benefit? And all the stuff which is benefit I'm then putting into section 4, and I'm then making the link between the two. In reality, that is quite an artificial narrative, and you have to decide for yourself how far you're able ethically to push that, given that it's quite a lot of massaging required to get it to fit into the more linear framework of REF. But it is a problem. And a lot of people struggling with this, myself including, because I'm an action researcher. So shall we saying, should we drop the weaker ones? I think it really depends. So where you've got some really clear 4-star impacts, why risk the score with a couple of low-grade ones? But the more common scenario is I've got a whole load of these things which I think are kind of around about the 2/3-star. And actually, if we're all, everything's kind of grading in that 2/3-star kind of category, then potentially removing that is a problem. I'm spreading my risks now. Well, yeah, it's subjective. I'm not sure which of these are going to get 3-star. And I think if they've all got that chance, then let's keep them all in and let's not make this look too thin as a result. Yeah, it's a really hard judgment call. And then the clear judgment call is where you've got kind of opposing really high, really low, as in the example with this we looked at with a really impressive policy impact. But yeah, the first step was we raised public awareness and we couldn't really prove it.
Yeah, I would say the same. Sometimes I say you've got loads of different impacts, and in brackets, and they're all equally strong-ish. Just by the sheer breadth of impacts and areas where you went and pathways feeding into impact, that's great because you show that you have really gone everywhere to try and get your work out and do something with it. And in that case, yes. But if one of those really took off and you got some really clear, strong impact, then it's less of an argument to keep the others in. So I'm basically saying the same as Mark, but reframing that in how I sometimes phrase it in reviews.
Brilliant. So we're pretty much out of time, and I'm just going to make a concluding point. I'll let Bella make a concluding point as well, which is just to say, chin up. There's a lot of people feeling quite nervous at this point in the process. And Bella and I, because we work across multiple institutions, will almost always say it could definitely be worse elsewhere. There are a lot of people really struggling, really scraping the barrel, really struggling to find anything that is worthy of submission, let alone up to 3 and 4 star. You're definitely not alone if you're struggling with this. There is a help available, and hopefully our paper is part of that help. So let's pull together within our institutions, even if we can't help each other across institutions, and be positive here. We've got some exciting stories to tell. Do you want to say anything by way of conclusion?
Yeah. Actually, I think Gareth has asked a question that he's asked before, but we haven't quite answered. Where do you put the pathway? Do you put the pathway in section 2 or section 4?
Oh yeah.
And well, I think we haven't really answered that.
I see people doing it at the end of section 2, and it's not a problem. But I personally prefer to put it at the beginning of section 4, and either unlabeled with labeled impacts or a labeled pathway, so you're not confusing this with an impact and giving me a low score for it.
Yeah, so as long as you're being explicit. So this kind of links back to what we said at the beginning, being specific, being explicit about what your claim is, what you don't want to put forward as a claim, and who is affected. Yeah, I would like that to be my closing words. Be specific.
Yeah.
And I know that you know this anyway. I've seen a tweet recently saying, how many more words do you know about, how many synonyms do you know for vague? I said, well, use the antonyms, be specific, be explicit, make this clear. Again, there's only so much you can do.
Brilliant.
So thank you so much for contributing, for asking questions, for challenging us, for asking for clarification. I think that was a big aim of the webinar, because it's always daunting to put something out in print, to get something out for everyone to read, and to know, thanks to your feedback, that people are actually reading it, and for giving us the opportunity to clarify some things. I think that's been really helpful or valuable for me personally, and thanks for, well, got to see that you seem to have found it helpful too.
Indeed. Take care, guys. Thank you.